Have you ever just, looked at your own hand and really wondered, what is this actually made of? I mean, not just skin and bone, but what are the fundamental chemical ingredients that make you, well, you, and not, say, a rock? Today, we are going to deconstruct the recipe of life itself.
So, it turns out, you and the ground you walk on, you're made of the same basic stuff, the same elements. But here's the kicker. It is all about the recipe. I mean, look at this. The Earth's crust is almost half oxygen, sure, but the real story is in the other ingredients. Living things like us have way more carbon and hydrogen. And that huge difference, it's not an accident. It's the chemical signature that makes life even possible.
So, okay, if life and non-life are both pulling from the same elemental toolkit, what is it that makes our recipe so incredibly special? That's the big question we're going to tackle right now.
And here's our game plan. First, we're going to see how scientists actually figure this stuff out, how they deconstruct life. Then, we'll meet the 4 essential building blocks, see how they get assembled into these giant molecules. And finally, we'll zoom in on proteins and their superpowered cousins, enzymes, that basically put life in fast forward.
Right, so to figure out any recipe, what do? You have to break down the finished dish into its raw ingredients. Well, in biology, it's pretty much the same idea. Scientists use this surprisingly simple but really powerful method to figure out exactly what we're made of.
Believe it or not, it's a basic 3-step process. You take some living tissue, say a piece of liver, and you grind it up with a mild acid. That helps break everything down. Then, you strain that whole slurry through a simple cheesecloth. And this one step, this simple straining action, neatly separates everything into 2 incredibly important groups.
So the liquid that passes through the cloth, that's called the acid-soluble pool. Just think of it like a chemical soup, and it's full of all the tiny building blocks, the micromolecules. And the stuff that gets caught in the cloth, that's the acid-insoluble fraction, and it contains all the big, complex structures, the macromolecules. And that right there, that's the key. This simple experiment perfectly separates life's ingredients into the small parts and the giant things they build.
Okay, so let's start by looking at that chemical soup. What's actually floating around in there? Well, these micromolecules are the fundamental Lego bricks of life. They're the simple, individual pieces used to build everything else, and they basically come in 4 main families.
First up, amino acids. Imagine you have an alphabet with 20 different letters. By arranging those letters in different orders, you can spell out thousands and thousands of different words. Well, in this case, those words are proteins, and each one has a totally unique job to do. Next, we've got the simple sugars, like glucose. We all know these as our main energy source, right? But they also link up to build massive structures. For example, the super tough cellulose that makes up a tree, or even the cotton in your shirt. That's really just a giant, long chain of glucose molecules. Then we have fatty acids and glycerol. These guys combine to form lipids, which we just call fats and oils, and they have a couple of big jobs. They're fantastic for storing energy long-term, and maybe even more importantly, they form the membranes that create the actual boundary of every single one of your cells.
And finally, we have nucleotides. These are a huge deal. They're the building blocks of information itself, DNA and RNA. You can think of them as the individual bits of data that, when you string them together, form the master blueprint for building and running an entire organism.
All right, so we've met the Lego bricks. Now let's look at the incredible things they build. We're going back to that stuff that got caught in the cheesecloth, the macromolecules. This is where those simple little parts assemble into the giant functional machinery of life. So what is a cell mostly made of? Well, this chart tells a really interesting story. A cell is mostly water. No big surprise there. But look at what happens when you take the water out. What's left? The single biggest component, by a long shot, is protein. And that is a massive clue telling us just how critical these things are. Which brings us here. Proteins are, without a doubt, the workhorses of the cell. If you think of DNA as the architect's blueprint, then proteins are the construction crew. They're the plumbers, the electricians, and all the heavy machinery all rolled into one. They literally do everything.
And their job titles are just incredibly diverse. You've got structural proteins like collagen, which is the literal scaffolding holding your body together. Then you have hormones, like insulin, acting as a chemical messenger. You have defenders, like antibodies, and transporters, like GLUT4, which is like a bouncer at a club door, deciding what gets into the cell. From structure to communication to defense, proteins are running the whole show.
So how does a simple string of letters become this complex 3D machine? It is all in the fold. The first step, the primary structure, is just that chain of amino acids. But then that chain starts to twist and coil into secondary shapes. After that, the whole thing folds up on itself into a complex, unique 3D shape, the tertiary structure. And this is what matters. A protein's shape defines its function. If you get the fold wrong, the machine is broken. Some even team up with other proteins to form these massive quaternary structures.
Now, let's zoom in on a very special class of proteins that are absolutely essential for life as we know it, enzymes. To put it simply, they're life's catalysts. They are the fast-forward button for chemistry, making things happen at a speed that can actually sustain a living thing.
You see, every chemical reaction needs a little bit of energy to get started. Think of it like the push you need to get a boulder rolling downhill. That push is called activation energy. Well, an enzyme superpower is to dramatically lower that hill, so the boulder barely needs a tap. And this allows reactions to happen millions of times faster. Without them, our bodies would just grind to a halt. To really see just how powerful enzymes are, let's take one simple example happening in your blood this very second, turning carbon dioxide into carbonic acid. Without an enzyme, this reaction still happens, but it is painfully slow. It produces just 200 molecules in an entire hour. Let that sink in. Just 200 molecules in 60 minutes. At that pace, your body just couldn't possibly function.
But now, let's add the enzyme that was designed for this one job, carbonic anhydrase. With its help, the very same reaction now produces 600,000 molecules.
Every single second. I mean, just think about that. We went from 200 in an hour to 600,000 in a second. That's not just a little faster. That is an almost unimaginable leap in speed.
That one single protein speeds up the reaction by a factor of 10 million. And remember, there are thousands of different enzymes just like this working in your body right now. This isn't just chemistry anymore. This is life operating at impossible speeds.
So there you have it. That's the recipe. You take a few common elements, 4 basic types of building blocks, and then you add a masterclass in folding and catalases. It is such an elegant system, building all the complexity we see in life from the simplest of chemical rules. It really makes you wonder, what other secrets are still waiting for us, hiding in the chemistry that makes us who we are?